I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not on the guest list.
Please check again.
Some people just don't belong here.
He's late.
Welcome, sir.
Where is my wife? Who touched my wife?
Meet the new owner of this hotel, Mr. Elijah Carter. Play the security footage.
Respect costs nothing, but prejudice costs everything.
Please hit the subscribe button, like, and leave your thoughts below. Thank you. The restaurant doors slammed shut. Two security guards stepped forward, blocking the entrance like a wall of black suits. Every guest inside turned to look. Waiters froze mid-step. Glasses stopped clinking halfway to lips. All eyes locked on one woman standing alone at the door, dressed in an elegant navy gown, her back straight, her chin high, her hands calm at her sides. She had just been told in front of everyone that she was not the type of customer allowed inside the city's most exclusive private dinner. She did not shout. She did not cry. She did not even blink. She simply lifted her wrist, checked the time on her watch, and whispered 4 quiet words. "He's late." The manager folded his arms and smirked at her, loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. "So is your imaginary husband." Laughter rippled through the room like a wave nobody bothered to stop. Somebody's phone was already recording, held low, half hidden, the way people record things they know are wrong but want to enjoy anyway. 3 minutes passed. Then something strange happened outside. The street went quiet. One by one, the luxury cars parked near the entrance began pulling aside, as if making room for something bigger than themselves. A long, black, one-of-one Rolls-Royce rolled to a silent stop directly in front of the doors. Its engine barely made a sound. The chauffeur stepped out first, walked around the hood without a word, and opened the back door. The man who stepped out onto the red carpet was not there to rescue anyone. He was there because he already owned everything the people inside thought they controlled, and in the next few minutes, every single person standing in that room was about to learn that the hard way. 6 hours earlier, none of this had even begun. Dr. Naomi Carter sat at her kitchen table that morning, holding a thick cream envelope with gold lettering pressed into the paper. Her hands were steady, the same steady hands that had spent the last 10 years performing free heart surgeries on children whose families could never afford the bill. She had built her whole life around that steadiness, in the operating room, in her marriage, in every hard decision she had ever made. Naomi had grown up watching her mother work long hours cleaning other people's homes just to keep food on the table, and she had promised herself, even as a young girl doing homework at a kitchen table much smaller than this one, that she would spend her life fixing things that mattered: hearts, families, futures. She had earned her medical degree through scholarships and sleepless nights, and now she ran a small program at the Children's Hospital that quietly covered the cost of surgery for families who had nowhere else to turn. She never talked about it at parties. She never wanted credit. She simply did the work, week after week, because she remembered exactly what it felt like to need help that never seemed to come. The invitation in her hands was for a charity gala at the Imperial Crown Hotel, the tallest, most glamorous building in the city, a place where billionaires, senators, and movie stars gathered under crystal chandeliers to write checks with more zeros than most people would ever see in a lifetime. Her husband, Elijah Carter, walked into the kitchen already adjusting his cufflinks, his mind clearly somewhere else, somewhere important. He kissed her forehead, told her she looked beautiful even in her robe, and admitted he would be late that evening. He was closing a deal, a confidential business acquisition he could not talk about yet, not even to her, not even a hint. Naomi smiled and told him not to worry. She would go ahead alone and save him a seat near the stage. Neither of them knew, standing in that quiet kitchen with coffee steam rising between them, that the hotel hosting the gala that night was the exact same company Elijah was secretly buying before midnight, and that by the time the party ended, the doors, the staff, the manager, every single brick of that building would legally belong to him. Elijah had spent the last 4 months chasing this deal in complete silence, meeting lawyers in quiet back rooms, reviewing contracts late into the night after Naomi had already fallen asleep beside him. The Imperial Crown Hotel Group had been struggling behind its glamorous exterior, buried under debt nobody outside a small circle of executives knew existed. Elijah saw an opportunity most investors were too nervous to touch, A chance to rebuild something broken from the inside out, and he had quietly outbid 3 larger companies to get there first. The final signatures were scheduled for that same evening, in a private office 2 floors above the very ballroom where his wife was about to walk in wearing the navy gown he had watched her pick out that morning. He had no idea, sitting in that glass office reviewing final numbers, that downstairs at the exact same moment, guards were closing in around the one person he trusted more than anyone else in the world. The car dropped Naomi off at the base of a wide marble staircase glowing under golden lights. Guests floated past her in silk gowns and tailored tuxedos, each one waved through smoothly by a smiling hostess standing beside a velvet rope. Naomi walked forward with her invitation in hand, expecting the same warm welcome everyone else had just received. But the moment she reached the rope, the hostess's smile disappeared like someone had flipped a switch behind her eyes. Her gaze flicked over Naomi's dress, over her skin, over her face, lingering just a second too long, and something cold settled behind her expression. She said the invitation looked invalid. She said it without even reading it, without turning it over, without checking a single detail. 2 security guards appeared on either side of Naomi almost instantly, as if they had been waiting for exactly this signal all night. Nearby guests slowed their steps, phones rising, screens glowing in the dark, ready to capture whatever was about to happen next. Word seemed to travel through the crowd without anyone saying a thing. The manager arrived a moment later, straightening his jacket, clearly enjoying the sudden attention pointed his way. He told Naomi, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear, that tonight's event was invite only, and that she did not appear to be on any list at all. Naomi stayed perfectly calm. She held up the embossed card, the exact same card sitting inside dozens of purses around her, and simply asked him to look at it. He barely glanced down for half a second. Then, right there in front of everyone, he tore it in half. The sound of tearing paper seemed to echo louder than it should have, louder than the music, louder than the chatter, louder than anything else on that staircase. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman near the door whispered that this was going too far. But nobody stepped forward to stop it. Nobody ever does. Then, almost as if the universe wanted to twist the knife a little deeper, a woman in a bright red dress strolled up the staircase without any invitation at all, empty-handed, smiling wide. The same hostess who had frozen Naomi out lit up instantly, wrapping the woman in a warm hug like they were old friends reuniting after years apart. The manager rushed to her side and personally guided her through the velvet rope, chatting happily about how thrilled he was that she could make it. A few guests near the rope exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to say something or simply look away and pretend they had not seen it at all. An older gentleman in a black tuxedo actually opened his mouth as if he might speak up, but his wife tugged gently at his sleeve, and he closed it again, choosing silence over discomfort like so many people in that crowd would choose again and again that night. Naomi watched all of this happen 3 feet away from her torn invitation, still lying in 2 pieces near her shoes. She asked the manager, calmly, without raising her voice even slightly, why the woman was allowed inside without anything at all, not even a name on a list. He turned to her with a slow, cruel smile and said the words that would replay in Naomi's mind for the rest of the night. Some people don't need invitations. The crowd around them laughed. Not everyone. But enough. Enough for Naomi to feel every single one of those laughs land somewhere deep in her chest. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She bent down slowly, picked up the 2 torn halves of her invitation, folded them together with careful fingers, and slid them into her purse, almost like she was saving evidence for a trial nobody else in that crowd knew was coming. What none of them understood, not the manager, not the hostess, not a single guest laughing behind their champagne glasses, was that this humiliation had never been an accident. Not even close. The woman who had organized the entire gala, a polished socialite named Victoria Ashford, had been watching from a private balcony above the entrance the whole time, hidden behind tinted glass, sipping wine slowly as the scene unfolded exactly the way she had planned it weeks earlier. 20 years before that night, long before galas and gowns and gold-lettered invitations, Victoria's family had employed a quiet, hard-working cleaner who scrubbed their marble floors and polished their silver every single day without complaint. That cleaner's name was Naomi's mother. Victoria had never forgotten the sight of that woman kneeling in her family's hallway at the end of a long shift, and somewhere deep inside her, she had never accepted that the cleaner's daughter could grow up to wear gowns finer than her own, marry a man wealthier than anyone standing in that ballroom, and walk through the world with more grace than Victoria had ever managed to fake in front of a mirror. Victoria had spent her entire adult life building a careful image, endless charity boards, magazine features, photographs beside politicians, all of it polished and perfect on the surface. But underneath that polish was a woman who measured her own worth by how far above others she could stand, and nothing threatened that feeling more than watching someone she once considered beneath her family rise higher than she ever had. So when Naomi's name appeared on the guest list weeks earlier, buried among hundreds of other names, Victoria made a single quiet phone call to the hostess and gave a simple instruction. Refuse her at the door. No matter what she says. No matter what she shows you. Tonight was never really about a guest list at all. It was revenge, carefully dressed up as black tie protocol so that nobody in that crowd would ever think to question it. But Victoria had missed one small detail, the kind of detail that changes everything. Standing near the valet stand at the bottom of the staircase was a 17-year-old boy named Marcus, parking cars for tips he was quietly saving toward community college. He had watched the entire scene unfold from start to finish, the torn invitation fluttering to the ground, the cruel laughter rising into the night air, the manager's smirk as he said those final words. Something about it made his stomach twist in a way he could not ignore. Without saying a word to anyone around him, he had quietly pulled out his phone the moment the guards surrounded Naomi and recorded every second of it, the tearing of the card, the laughing crowd, the manager's smug expression, all of it captured in crisp, unshakable video. His hands trembled slightly as he saved the file to his phone. He did not know Naomi. He had never met her before that night. But he had grown up watching his own mother get treated the exact same way at stores, at banks, at places that were supposed to serve everyone equally and somehow never did. Marcus had grown up 2 bus rides away from the Imperial Crown, in a small apartment where his mother worked double shifts at a laundromat just to keep the lights on. She had raised him alone, and she had taught him one rule above all others, that dignity was not something rich people were born with and poor people had to earn. He remembered being 9 years old, standing beside her at a grocery store while a manager accused her of shoplifting simply because her coat looked worn and her English carried an accent. Nobody had ever apologized to her that day either. Watching Naomi standing at that velvet rope, calm and dignified while strangers laughed at her, felt like watching that same memory play out all over again, except this time, Marcus was old enough to actually do something about it. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he had saved months earlier, after driving a black Rolls-Royce into the hotel garage for a private client who tipped him more than he made in an entire week. The contact was saved simply as Mr. Carter. His thumb hovered over the screen for only a second before he pressed send. The moment that message left his phone, Marcus had no idea he had just lit a fuse that nobody in that building would be able to put out. Inside the ballroom, the party rolled on as if nothing had happened at all. String lights glowed above long tables covered in white cloth. Waiters carried silver trays stacked with tiny desserts nobody would remember by morning. Guests clinked glasses and posed for photographs beside ice sculptures shaped like swans. Naomi stood near a pillar at the edge of the room, alone, watching people who had laughed at her only minutes earlier now smiling for cameras like nothing at all was wrong. She had been allowed in eventually, not because anyone apologized, but because a junior staff member had quietly waved her through once the crowd thinned out, too afraid of the growing whispers to cause another scene. Naomi did not smile back at anyone. She did not seek out sympathy or apologies. She simply stood near the pillar, arms folded gently, replaying the manager's words in her mind. Some people don't need invitations, and she thought about her mother, about the years her mother had spent kneeling on floors just like the ones under her heels right now, scrubbing them clean for people who never once looked her in the eye. She thought about every child waiting in a hospital bed for a surgery that could save their life, unaware that the woman meant to save them had just been treated like she did not belong in the very room raising money for them. She checked her watch again. Still no sign of Elijah. But something inside her, some quiet, steady certainty built from years of trusting him completely, told her that whatever was coming next was going to change the entire shape of that room. Back on the sidewalk, the shift happened all at once, like the entire street had taken a single breath and held it. The chatter died. The laughter stopped completely. Every valet, every guard, every guest near the entrance turned toward the road as a convoy of black SUVs rolled up in perfect formation, their headlights cutting sharp lines through the darkness. Bodyguards stepped out first, scanning the crowd with quiet, practiced precision, their eyes moving from face to face without a single wasted second. Then, from the rear vehicle, a long custom Rolls-Royce eased to a smooth stop directly at the base of the staircase. The driver rounded the car in unhurried steps and opened the back door. Elijah Carter stepped out, buttoning his jacket with one hand, his face calm, unreadable, and somehow more dangerous than anger could ever look. Nobody at the entrance recognized him. To them, he looked like just another wealthy stranger arriving fashionably late to a party he had every right to attend. The manager, sensing a fresh chance to impress someone new, rushed forward with a wide, oily smile already forming, already rolling out a second red carpet runner across the marble. "Welcome, sir," he said, extending his hand toward Elijah like they were about to shake on a deal. Elijah did not look at him. He did not slow his steps even slightly. The clicking of his shoes against the marble was the only sound left on that entire staircase. Guests parted without being asked, stepping backward instinctively, the way people move away from something they cannot fully explain but instantly respect. He walked straight past the manager, past the frozen hostess, past the stunned crowd still clutching their phones, until he reached the one person he had actually come for. He stopped in front of Naomi, glanced down at the torn invitation peeking out from her purse, and turned to face the entire crowd with a stillness that felt more threatening than any shout ever could. Then he asked one question, low and sharp enough to silence the whole staircase in an instant. "Who touched my wife?" Nobody answered. Nobody dared to even breathe too loudly. Before anyone could recover from the silence, heavy footsteps echoed from somewhere inside the hotel. The actual owner of the Imperial Crown, an older man in a perfectly tailored suit, came rushing down the grand staircase, his face pale, his breathing uneven as if he had just seen something that terrified him. His assistant trailed behind him, whispering something about paperwork and signatures, but the owner was not listening anymore. He pushed past the manager without a single glance and stopped directly in front of Elijah, extending both hands in a nervous, apologetic gesture that shook slightly at the wrists. Then, turning to face the stunned crowd behind him, he raised his voice loud enough for the entire entrance to hear every word. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice cracking slightly on the second word, "allow me to introduce the man who completed the purchase of the Imperial Crown Hotel exactly 30 minutes ago." The words landed like a slow, spreading shockwave rolling through the crowd. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips and stayed there. Somewhere near the back, a woman actually gasped out loud, her hand flying to her mouth. The manager's smile drained from his face in real time, his mind clearly rewinding through every cruel word he had just said, every insult he had thrown at the woman standing 3 feet away from him, the same woman who was now, in every legal sense that mattered, married to his brand new employer. But Elijah was not finished. In fact, he had barely even started. He turned to the hotel owner and asked for one simple thing: the largest screen inside the ballroom activated immediately, right now, without delay. Confused staff scrambled to comply, fingers fumbling over control panels, and within minutes, the giant display wall behind the main stage flickered to life in front of the entire room. What appeared on it was not a welcome message or a slideshow of smiling donors. It was Marcus's video, playing in full, unedited, unfiltered, for every single guest inside that ballroom to see with their own eyes. The torn invitation drifting to the floor. The laughing crowd leaning in for a better view. The manager's cruel smile as he said the words, "Some people don't need invitations," loud enough for the microphone on someone's phone to catch it perfectly. Guests who had laughed just an hour earlier now sat frozen in their chairs, watching themselves on the giant screen above them, watching their own silence, their own smirks, their own recorded phones aimed not in support of a stranger, but for pure entertainment. There was nowhere left to look. Every insult replayed. Every laugh echoed back at the very people who had laughed it in the first place. Nobody in that ballroom could hide from what they had just watched themselves become in front of their friends, their partners, their business associates. A politician near the front table quietly set down his fork and stared at the tablecloth, unable to look up. A young couple who had laughed loudest during the actual incident now sat in complete silence, their joined hands slowly pulling apart under the table. Even the string quartet, still holding their instruments near the stage, had stopped playing without anyone telling them to, the music replaced by nothing but the sound of the video looping quietly in the background and dozens of people breathing a little too carefully. In the heavy silence that followed, thick enough to feel on the skin, Naomi finally stepped forward and spoke for the first time since the video had ended. She told the room, in a calm, steady voice that carried without needing to be raised, that she had never come to that gala for the champagne or the chandeliers or the string quartet playing softly near the stage. She had come because the charity behind the event had promised to fund heart surgeries for children whose families could never afford them, children her own hospital had already agreed to operate on completely free of charge, no matter what the fundraiser actually collected. The woman they had mocked, torn paper in front of, thrown cruel words at, and refused entry to like a stranger off the street, was the very surgeon scheduled to save dozens of those children's lives in the coming months. A wave of visible shame swept through the crowd like a cold wind through an open window. Somewhere near the back, a woman quietly lowered her face into her hands. The socialite in the red dress, the one welcomed so warmly earlier, now stared down at her own shoes, unable to meet anyone's eyes, least of all Naomi's. Then Naomi did something nobody in that room expected. Not even Elijah standing beside her. She reached into her purse, past the torn invitation still folded carefully at the bottom, and pulled out a thin stack of printed documents she had brought without telling anyone why. She looked directly across the ballroom at Victoria Ashford, who had finally stepped down from the balcony above, her composed mask beginning to crack visibly at the edges for the first time all night. The room stayed utterly silent, waiting, nobody quite sure what she was about to say next. Naomi calmly explained that she had not walked into that gala blind, not even for a second. Months earlier, a worried accountant working for the charity had quietly reached out to her hospital, deeply concerned about strange gaps appearing in the organization's financial records, donations that never seemed to actually reach the children they were supposed to help. Naomi had passed those concerns along, carefully and quietly, to people who could actually investigate them properly. Now, holding the printed evidence steady in her hand, she revealed to the entire room that Victoria had been quietly draining money from the children's charity for years, hiding the theft behind fake administrative expenses and inflated vendor invoices that nobody had ever bothered to double-check. Before Victoria could open her mouth to deny a single word of it, several guests seated near the back of the ballroom rose from their tables and pulled small badges from inside their jackets. They had been sitting among the crowd all evening, sipping wine, blending in perfectly, laughing along at the right moments, federal investigators who had already been quietly watching the charity for weeks after receiving an anonymous tip about missing funds. They moved calmly through the stunned crowd and placed handcuffs on Victoria Ashford in front of the very guests she had spent years carefully impressing with dinners just like this one. Victoria's face had gone pale white under the ballroom lights, her mouth opening and closing without a single sound coming out, the composed mask she had worn for 20 years finally shattering completely in front of the same crowd she had spent her whole life trying to control. She looked toward Naomi one last time, searching for something, anger, pity, maybe even recognition, but Naomi only looked back at her with a calm, steady expression that gave nothing away. As agents guided her toward the exit, Victoria's designer heels clicked against the marble floor in a slow, uneven rhythm, the same floor Naomi's mother had once scrubbed clean by hand, decades earlier, in a house that belonged to the very same family now being let out in handcuffs. Nobody in the ballroom said a word as she passed. Nobody laughed this time. The manager, watching his entire world collapse in real time under the bright lights of that ballroom, dropped to his knees beside Elijah, begging for forgiveness, insisting over and over that he did not know who Naomi was, as if that excuse could somehow undo what the entire room had just watched replayed on the screen above them. Elijah looked down at him for a long, silent moment that seemed to stretch far longer than it actually did. He did not shout. He did not humiliate the man further in front of everyone. Instead, he turned to address the entire ballroom, his voice calm but absolutely final, the kind of voice that does not need to be repeated twice. Starting immediately, every employee across every property he now owned would undergo mandatory training on discrimination and respect. No exceptions, no delays. A new anonymous reporting system would be installed so that no guest, no employee, no cleaner, no doctor, no stranger simply walking through the door would ever again be judged and dismissed before they were even given a chance to speak a single word. Every security policy at the Imperial Crown would be rewritten from the ground up, line by line, checked and approved by an outside committee with no ties to the hotel at all, so that no single manager would ever again hold that much unquestioned power over another human being standing at a door. As for the manager and the hostess who had orchestrated the humiliation together at that velvet rope, they were dismissed on the spot, their access cards deactivated before they even reached the exit doors. Then Elijah turned toward the valet stand near the entrance, where Marcus still stood frozen in his uniform, unsure whether he was about to be thanked or fired for recording hotel property without permission. Elijah told him, in front of the entire room, that his courage that night had changed more lives than he would ever fully understand, and that starting the very next morning, a full university scholarship and a permanent place within the company would be waiting for him, no strings attached. The room, still trembling with shame just moments earlier, slowly rose into applause, not for the wealth on display, not for the Rolls-Royce parked outside, but for the small, brave choice one teenage boy had made when he decided that silence was simply not an option that night. Months passed quietly after that. The Imperial Crown Hotel reopened under new leadership, and slowly, carefully, its reputation transformed from a symbol of exclusivity into a symbol of fairness, a place people began to speak about not because of who it kept out, but because of who it finally welcomed in without hesitation. On a warm evening in early spring, Naomi returned to that same staircase, not as a woman turned away at the door, but as the guest of honor at a brand new charity banquet, one that would go on to raise more money for children's heart surgeries than any single event in the hospital's entire history. Above the entrance, in the exact spot where guards had once blocked her path, a small bronze plaque now caught the evening light, engraved with a single sentence that every guest paused to read on their way inside. Character opens every door that prejudice tries to close. Marcus stood near the same valet stand that night, no longer in a uniform, but in a sharp new suit befitting his new role inside the company, watching the woman he had once secretly filmed being humiliated now walk through those doors as a hero to hundreds of children she had never even met. He thought about his mother, about the grocery store manager who never apologized, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something settle quietly inside his chest, a feeling close to peace. Inside the ballroom, the same giant screen that had once played his shaky, trembling video now displayed photographs of children who had already gone through successful heart surgery, smiling, healthy, alive, thanks in part to the very night everyone once wanted to forget. As Naomi walked up the staircase with Elijah's hand wrapped gently around hers, camera flashes lit up the night around them, not because of the Rolls-Royce parked at the curb, not because of the fortune behind their names, but because of what they had proven months earlier, on that very same staircase, that true power was never really about status. It was about dignity. It was about justice. And it was about standing beside the person you love when the whole world happens to be watching. But not everyone connected to that night had truly been accounted for, no matter how settled the story seemed on the surface. Buried deep inside the financial documents Naomi had handed over that evening, investigators later found something Victoria herself had apparently never known was there, a second signature authorizing some of the very same fraudulent transfers, a signature that did not belong to Victoria Ashford at all. It belonged to someone still working quietly inside Elijah's own company, someone who had sat through every board meeting for years, smiling, nodding, taking notes, waiting patiently for something none of them had seen coming yet. As Naomi and Elijah stepped through the hotel doors that evening, arm in arm, neither of them noticed the small unmarked folder left discreetly on Elijah's desk upstairs, unopened, waiting quietly in the dark, holding a single name that was about to change everything they thought they had already won.